This remarkable, newly discovered footage, which we see here in such vivid colour, was shot in Munich in July 1939, just 6 weeks before the outbreak of the Second World War. Munich had a special importance in the National Socialist movement. That's where it began. And Hitler always liked to go back to the place where it all began from, as if he was strengthened from that memorialization. But it was also the capital of art, it's certainly in his mind. And then the Nazis, I think, strengthened and reinforced that. The date, the 14th of July, is interesting because by a remarkable coincidence, it was to the day 150 years since the storming of the Bastille in 1789, which inaugurated the French Revolution.
My name is Peter Feierabend, and I'm the son of the amateur filmmaker who made this film. My father was an orthopedic technician. He made artificial arms and legs.
My name is Bernd Feierabend. I live here in Munich, and I've taken over my father's company, which he started in 1932. This film was shot in 1939. It's unique. My father made it and always kept it at home. We would see it as children or with friends of the family, but we never showed it publicly. We were a bit shy, I suppose. But anyway, this film is a very important record of this period of history, and I'm glad that it can now be shown to the public.
Gezeigt werden kann.
My name is Martin Summer. I'm the owner of the Heliopan light filter factory in Gräfelfing. Our film club was really quite fun. I was one of the youngest members. And we made films using 8mm, 9.5mm and 16mm film. Then every week we would show films at the club and criticize each other's work so that we'd improve. Mr. Feierabend was a very active filmmaker, of course, and he seemed to have contacts with the Munich leadership. He had a pass, apparently, and so could film close up in a way that was not possible for ordinary amateurs like us. He was opposed to Hitler, but you have to understand he was also an enthusiastic filmmaker. And so, as members of the Association of German Amateur Filmmakers, had all the acts that they needed. At the end of the war, he hid this particular film under a pile of wood in the cellar. And from then on, the film was kept at home. Now I've decided that this film should be shown to the public.
Habe ich daran gedacht, diesen Film auch einmal der Öffentlichkeit zugänglich zu machen.
So, jetzt ist sie Uli. Vor 4 Stunden vorher ist die Uli zu uns runtergegangen.
So what we are seeing in this colour footage from the summer of 1939 is a 3-day weekend festival of art which was held in Munich, which comprised concerts, dancing in the parks, a major exhibition of Nazi art in the House of Art, and all of this climaxing in a huge, spectacular parade supposedly representing 2,000 years of German art and culture.
My name is Josefa Hamann. I was born and bred in Munich and had the pleasure to be involved in the parade on the day of German art. Well, the fuss started weeks beforehand because everything was being decorated, you know. There were all the preparations to be done. Just imagine, thousands of meters of flags and material and statues. I mean, it was an enormous fuss. It was quite unbelievable. Also, oddly enough, the weather was always wonderful on the days when these parades happened. And people used to call it Hitler weather. It was a glorious day and a lovely experience, which I've not forgotten to this day, and I'm 70. Officially, it didn't really have anything to do with politics. For us, it was just a beautiful day, a chance to meet people. Also, we were recreating something with all those different costumes, weren't we? We were really happy.
Dann wird man sich erkennen, wenn man es wäre.
We are here on one of the most significant places of Munich's history. This is one of the Ehrentempel where Hitler's Nazi martyrs have been buried. As you see, it's all grown over. It was not touched since '45 when the Allies had blown up this temple. But not all of the buildings of the remnants of the Nazi time have been destroyed. Over there is the so-called Führerbau, where the Munich Treaty has been signed together with Chamberlain. Over there is the administration building where all of the Nazi members were listed. And we are here in the center of Munich. And this is very significant because the Nazi wanted to get a connection between this important place, the Königsplatz, which was done by Ludwig I 150 years ago, and this should be linked with the Nazi movement, with this ensemble of important places and buildings.
Ist doch lustig, gell, für einen Amateur, weil er schützt. Das ist dann das Haus der Kunst, nicht? Der sieht ganz richtig da. Ja, also ich meine, dass man auch da sieht, die Säulen.
My God, the great eagle.
Ich heiße Else Peitz.
My name is Ilse Peitz. My maiden name is Muller, and my father had a large book and newspaper printing company in the Schellingstrasse. Well, he published Mein Kampf. Well, you know, at that time, everyone joined in so enthusiastically.
Da hat jeder gerne mitgemacht.
Everyone got involved, and all this joy released something in us.
Und so viel Freude löst ja auch was aus.
You see, we thought we were heading for a better future.
Bessere Zukunft.
These festivals of art, which I would say assumed a sort of quasi-sacred significance, were both entertainment but also served ideological and political functions for the regime. It was a way of legitimizing itself, celebrating the achievements of the folk of the German nation. Here we have a smiling Rudolf Hess, who seems to be enjoying the occasion.
Der Wagner hat ja eine Prothese gehabt, die das passen.
That was my boss at the time, Herr Minister Wagner, the one who just came up the stairs. He was a real womanizer. He'd just pick and choose his women.
Adolf Wagner, he was one of the old fighters who had been with Hitler in Munich in 1923. He was a rather coarse character, a Bavarian. In 1933, he had played a very important role during the Nazi takeover in Bavaria. He had become Minister of the Interior, and I think in a way that was the peak of his influence in 33-34. He had also been one of the organizers of the Night of the Long Knives, where the SA had been massacred under Hitler's orders.
He was a sadistic man and very self-opinionated. He would shout terribly at you if there was something wrong, or if you didn't understand something instantly. You have to say, he was simply a savage. Even in the office, when he liked a girl, he would just take her. I got an invitation like that once. But someone said to me, well, don't think that you're being invited to say the Lord's Prayer with him.
Eingeladen werden.
Das war die Branche? Ich weiß es nicht. Wer ist diese Tante da? Das ist der Lai, aber wer denn die Dame? Das weiß ich nicht. Ach, die schaut aber böse.
Ley was notorious as an alcoholic. He was a very coarse, plebeian type. Actually spoke a lot about culture and the role of culture in making people feel better about themselves. And it all contributed to creating a sort of spurious equality, I think. Yes, and we can see Freiherr von Fink, who raised the funds for financing the Haus der Kunst and was very much instrumental in bringing about this occasion. One of the interesting things in this particular footage, that here and there we see some gestures. We see Hitler in a more informal pose. It's very difficult to know what was on his mind, whether he had an inner life at all. Here we have Himmler smiling rather wanly. I think he was rather bored by these sort of proceedings. Himmler's presence in his SS uniform is a reminder of really the sinister side of all of this. Because the SS had grown enormously in importance through the 1930s, and Himmler was its organizer. Himmler, incidentally, was born in Munich. He was a Bavarian Catholic, and he had originally been a chicken farmer.
Ich heiße Günther Grassmann.
My name is Günther Grassmann. I was born in Munich in 1900. I'm a painter and am 92 years old. And I can perhaps tell you a little about the things I've experienced.
Die Zeit, die ich erlebt habe, erzählen. Es hat damals die Frau Trost.
Frau Trost was the wife of the architect who built the House of German Art.
Kunst gebaut hatte. Die hat einen Kreis von Gemälden.
And she gathered together a group of moderate modernists. In this way, she attempted to create a German artistic style.
Eine deutsche Kunst aufzubauen.
It was arranged for Hitler to come to Munich to endorse this planned exhibition. And that was when Hitler had one of his famous fits of rage. He said, "Where are the great German artists? They're in the cellar. And why are they there?" And then he got up onto a little trolley and was pushed through the various galleries.
Und hat sich durch sämtliche Räume fahren lassen.
And in every direction he shouted, "Get this out, out, out!"
Raus, raus.
Then he dismissed the whole jury. And so, the first exhibition in the House of German Art took place with all these over-the-top propaganda pictures. Some represented pastoral scenes, others were of heroic figures. Whilst they remained in power, that set the artistic tone.
Kunst war wunderbar, gell? Aufbauen immer. Es wurde immer das Schöne. Es wurde immer das Schöne gezeigt.
The House of Art was wonderful. They'd always show beautiful, interesting things there. I mean, never this modern stuff. Because I'm not keen on modern art. Because I can't make sense of it.
Und dass der Mensch am Schönen nicht nur...
But you know, beauty not only gives people joy, but also strength.
Ganz selbstverständlich. Nichts deprimiert mehr, als wir...
There's nothing more depressing than when everything is dirty or disorganized. I mean, this carries over into everyday life, doesn't it?
Geht ja dann in den Alltag über, ne? Und wenn ich...
So when I visited the House of Art, for instance, and saw beautiful pictures there, and then I came home and saw untidiness, then I would say to myself, well now, let's have a little bit of order here, please. I found it somehow uplifting, beautiful and uplifting.
Das erste Ziel unseres neuen deutschen Kunstschaffens ist ohne Zweifel schon heute erreicht. So wie von dieser Stadt München die Bau, künstlerische Gesundung ihren Ausgang nahm, hat hier auch vor 3 Jahren die Reinigung eingesetzt auf dem vielleicht noch mehr verwüsteten Gebiet der Plastik und Malerei. Der ganze Schwindelbetrieb einer dekadenten oder kernhaft verlogenen Modekunst ist zum Glück gebeten. Ein anständiges, allgemeines Niveau wurde erreicht.
Many of the paintings in this official German art exhibition of 1939, which was selected and purchased by Hitler himself, are today kept under lock and key in a Munich depot.
To lock this art away, from my point of view, this is crazy or nonsense, because everyone knows that this art is existing, and if you don't allow people to see it, they just get curious more and more, and this increases this secret and so on. This increases the interest and makes it even more dangerous.
The question has often arisen recently whether or not Nazi art should be exhibited again. I am strictly opposed to this idea because it is precisely those great works, for instance by Ziegler and so on, that are non-art. They have nothing to do with art. You know, if someone gives you a commission, then you have to realize that you must not subordinate yourself to the person who is commissioning you. These people, they all subordinated themselves to an ideology. They thought that if they served a great idea, then it meant that what they were doing was also great art. That is totally untrue. I would commit it all to oblivion.
Yes, you see, we had a house on the Tegernsee, and he enjoyed visiting us there. Goebbels and many other party members also came. They'd have a drink of coffee or would watch while all of us young girls would splash around in the lake and so on. I mean, they enjoyed it one way or another. It was just fun, you know. Then, when Hitler came to power, it was a little difficult, of course. Because all those Nazis wanted to come along too. Where is my Führer, they would say, and so on. And he didn't want all that. He wanted it all to be a bit more private. So we would never say, Heil mein Führer, but instead, good morning, Mr. Hitler.
Well, of course, here we see Hitler. He always has this somewhat comic look, which is very deceptive, I mean, from a distance in time. I don't think he had made this impression on contemporaries at all. I think in the age of television, we can't get away from the sort of Chaplin-esque side of Hitler. Of course, there is an anecdote there that, which is probably true, that Hitler grew his moustache after watching a Chaplin silent movie in the trenches when he was a soldier in the First World War. Of course, they shared the same birth date as well, 20th of April, 1889. an awful lot of saluting going on, and this is Julius Streicher, who was the Third Reich's most notorious anti-Semite. He was the Gauleiter of Nuremberg, and also one of the old comrades from the early days of the movement, a close personal friend of Hitler, and he was the editor of a newspaper called Der Stürmer, which had a circulation of about 500,000. Der Stürmer catered for a rather semi-pornographic taste, which fitted Streicher's own rather perverse sexual tastes. I mean, he was really into sadomasochism. He used to walk around with this bullwhip. He was a really rather awful figure. Nevertheless, Hitler liked to say about Streicher that he idealized the Jews. The climax of this weekend festival of art was a huge parade through the streets of Munich, representing 2,000 years of German culture, reportedly seen by over 1 million people.
Alles hat mitgemacht.
Everyone joined in. Everyone joined in. Of course, these great celebrations had a tremendous impact abroad.
You have to remember, we're about 6 weeks away from the outbreak of the Second World War. Hitler had planned since April, he'd given a directive to his own military to prepare an attack on Poland, beginning on the 1st of September. Hitler's strength had increased immensely since the Munich agreements of 1938. 11 million more Germans were in the Reich. Their armaments had grown, their population had grown. They sensed they were on some kind of irresistible wave.
The route followed the great history of Munich. So it was mainly following the buildings of Ludwig I. The great history of Munich should give background for this Festzug and should demonstrate the rise of the art in Munich again. It should become the Kunststadt der Bewegung, die Hauptstadt, the capital of art in the Nazi Empire.
Ja, die Juden schon, aber das ist immer sehr scheinbar sehr.
Yes, well, the Jews. Well, that was all done very discreetly. One simply accepted that one was not allowed to go to Jewish shops. They had shops, for instance, in the Karfingerstrasse. That's where all the lovely big shops were. And almost all of them belonged to Jews.
Die Juden halten ja sehr zusammen, haben viel.
Jews stick together. They have a strong sense of family. Perhaps we were a little too indifferent. Because, of course, there are some very, very decent Jews, you know.
Here we have Albert Speer in a rather romantic-looking mood. I think, in a way, you could say he was the glamour boy of the Third Reich. He was about 35 at the time. Hitler loved architecture, and I think his relationship to Speer, who was much younger, was that of looking on him affectionately as the man who would translate Hitler's own visions of imperial grandeur into architectural reality. This is Rudolf Hess looking around and watching Speer rather curiously. Seems to be a envy there, perhaps. Hess was the deputy of the Führer and had a rather pathetic complex of adoration towards him as the infallible leader of Germany. Of course, 2 years after this, Hess would make his mysterious flight to England, which would more or less end his role in the Third Reich. Yes, we can see Goebbels with the club foot. Of course, he was a short, unprepossessing figure, very much in contrast to the image of the Nazi Superman, which he cultivated in his propaganda. I think he had great inferiority complex, which explains some of his venomous rhetoric. Here we see Hitler and his Nazi paladins enjoying a joke. They seem to be quite relaxed when you think of the international tension. But then this is very much a celebratory occasion. They saw it as an essential instrument for winning over masses of ordinary people who they believed, probably rightly, shared their tastes.
Die Fahne in den Wind ist viel schwieriger.
Tschüss. Ein paar Kilometer durch die Stadt, da fällt ihnen das an.
Kilometer das Ganze. Da sind sie. Da war ich jetzt gewesen. Da war ich jetzt gewesen. Das ist sowas. Das war.
Die deutsche Jugend.
The German youth.
Der Hitler persönlich, ja.
There's Hitler himself, with his followers, his henchmen, as we used to call them.
Why do you think they organized these parades?
Well, I can only imagine that it was in order to increase his popularity. I mean, he was a bit power crazy, you know, surrounding himself with these great parades. I don't know what he really understood about art. Was that art for him? He was meant to be a painter, wasn't he? I've never seen any of his work.
Very tasteful, very beautiful, but really just too pretty to actually bring history to life.
Lebendig zu machen. Habe ich ein paar.
Well, I designed a few standards and delivered them. They were then taken off and embroidered somewhere.
Gestickt und also verwirklicht.
But as for the parade, I didn't do any other work for it.
Mitarbeit geleistet.
I did not take part in any sort of propaganda. All I did was put forward a few designs, which were then finished off. So no connection existed between me and the Nazis.
Nicht vorhanden.
Mr. Feyerabend was an excellent filmmaker. He would do everything himself. He would sit down night after night in order to make something good out of the film.
My father wasn't political at all. He was very opposed to the whole regime. He didn't actually fight in the war. Thanks to his job, he wasn't in fact called up, because his work was vital for the production of wooden legs for all the wounded soldiers.
Of course, because he was such an enthusiastic filmmaker, in the end, I suppose, his hobby was more important to him than his opposition to these brown shirts.
We didn't take part in any political activity in the film club. We were solely interested in filmmaking. We didn't know that it was all so extreme. We did know that there were concentration camps, true, but only that political opponents to the regime were being locked up. But I mean, we didn't know about all these things that went on there. We never knew anything. Also, we weren't interested. I mean, nothing happened to us, and then if nothing happens to you personally, you just don't bother.
Well, of course, Goebbels would never have allowed a film in this untouched form to have passed muster. Everything would have been much more orchestrated. Wouldn't have allowed these moments that we see of which are more informal, which are less, planned. They look like a pair of conspirators, sharing a dark secret. Goebbels built up Hitler's myth and his image. He was Hitler's PR man.
Höhepunkt des Tages der deutschen Kunst in München war die Eröffnung der dritten großen Kunstausstellung durch den Führer.
Walter Benjamin said fascism is the aestheticization of politics. It's as if you see the millions of German people looking at themselves, as it were, through a mirror that is presented to them of their greatness and their glory and the purity of their culture.
Till today, we really don't know how to handle this, how to deal with the architecture, with the art, with this history. There has been the idea after the war that the Germans should be educated to Democrats and that never something like this should happen again. But now with all of the problems we have with this new racism, we learn in a very bitter way that this education, so-called education, didn't work at all. This architecture could be used to keep the memory awake of what happened, what was connected with it when it was built. And this was not done, nowhere in Munich. And there is a discotheque in the Haus der Kunst. People don't think of its origin any longer.